Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ms. Roney Reads. This week, we are celebrating Indigenous Literacy Day, a chance to really celebrate the diversity and rich stories of Australia's First Nations peoples. Today, I'm going to be reading for you the first chapter of Wraith by Shane and Alex Smithers. Now, the copy I've got is a little bit different to the one on the screen. You'll notice that it actually has very different font. Now, something that our school library has got that I'm really excited to share with you are books that are designed for people with dyslexia. Now, the way that they are designed is that the pages have got bigger font, and they also have a different kind of font that is meant to help make it easier for dyslexic people to read the words on the page. If you have dyslexia or if you find reading challenging, reading one of these books might be really good for you. So please have a look in our school library when we're able to get back. If there is one that you're interested in, or if you're interested in these books, send me a message and I'll chat to Mrs. Matters and we'll see if we can get a copy of a book that you're keen out to you. So let's read the blurb of Wraith. Superman never had this problem. James can fly, though his landings need some work. However, that's the least of his problems when he crash lands into a city in the clouds. Soon, James is drawn into a race against time to find the Sapphire, a new technology designed to save the city from the effects of climate change. Finding his way home seems impossible, but with the help of O'Reilly, a young girl determined to save her city, James might be able to fly away and help save the city in the process. Let's read the first chapter. 1. Kurrajong, New South Wales, Australia. Losing concentration isn't always disastrous, but sometimes it is. It all depends on what you are concentrating on. Flying straight requires concentration. James can fly, and not in the boarding a plane and flying to Japan or wearing a jetpack kind of flying. James can, kind of fly like a bird. He doesn't flap his arms or anything, but he can fly. Deciding to ignore Darren's instruction to concentrate on flying straight is in the potentially disastrous category. James knew better than to close his eyes, but he did it anyway. He wanted to relax and block out everything except the sensation of weightlessness. Much better, he thought. Brah! Brah! What are you doing? Shouted Darren over and over. James was used to his best friend's bossiness, but sometimes, just sometimes, he wished Darren would just chill out. Besides, how could he concentrate as Darren wanted if he was shouting at him all the time? He opened his eyes. Oh, crap! He had drifted halfway across the paddock, above the treetops, and was now in a descending pattern. Below him, Darren was running and pointing to something up ahead at the, double crap, duck pond. No! James swore, tried to slow down, change direction, do anything, but nothing worked. He had only seconds before impact. A flurry of quacking ducks flapped and scrambled over one another in an attempt to get out of his way. He screwed his eyes shut and took one last deep breath before nosediving into the mud. He slid across the boggy ground and plunged headfirst into the ducks' filthy pond. Suddenly enveloped in a horrifying world of poo, he floundered about for several seconds trying to regain his bearings. The sludge clung to him like a wet blanket, dragging him down. He managed to clamber to his feet and coughed out a mixture of putrid mud and water and gasped for breath. It was the most disgusting thing he'd ever tasted, and he'd tasted a lot of disgusting things in his time, like Brussels sprouts, cod liver oil, and the occasional fly. When James had cleared most of the gunk out of his ears, he could hear Darren asking if he was all right. He waded through the waist-high water toward the edge of the pond. Covered in stinking sludge, he took a high step up onto the bank. His foot shot out from under him, and he face-planted in the mud. Brah! Quit hogging the pond, said Darren. Give the ducks a go. He burst out into laughter. With a groan, James rose to his hands and knees and crawled the rest of the way out of the pond. This was turning out to be one of those mornings he wished he'd spent in bed. Man, that was deadly. Your best crash yet. Darren wiped tears from his eyes. I'll get the hose. James stood up, undid the strap on his stack hat, and tossed it to one side. His hair, normally sandy brown, was caked in foul-smelling dark green goo. He scraped some of the muck off his face and wiped his hands on the front of his already filthy shirt. His wet jeans, which he tried to pull up several times, hung halfway down his backside, revealing his sodden boxer shorts. He stood there, feeling himself go redder and redder under all that mud. "Don't worry, mate," said Darren, returning with a long hose. "I'll clean you up in no time." He aimed the nozzle at James's head and squeezed the trigger. James let out a high-pitched squeal as a stream of icy water hit him in the face. "Stop! Stop it!" he yelled, holding up his hands to shield himself. His face burned. Darren ignored him. "Don't be such a sook, it's only water." He fired a jet at James's chest. "Turn around, this'll only take a sec." James faced the other way, grimacing as a river of slurry flowed down his back and into his underwear. When it was all over, he could hardly talk through his chattering teeth. "I'm going back to the house to have a shower." He wrapped his arms around his sides in an attempt to stop shaking and trudged away. "I'll just make sure the ducks are okay," yelled Darren after him. "Meet you in the kitchen." James kicked off his wet shoes and darted up the stairs, hoping his mother wouldn't see him. Standing under the hot, steamy shower, one hand pressed against the wall, the water pummeling the top of his head, James wondered why he'd sucked so much at flying. Not once since he'd started flying had he landed without crashing. He'd crashed into the house, bounced off the roof, missed the roof, but still managed to rip off the guttering, flown into trees, and hit the ground more times than he cared to count. He thought by now he should have improved enough to land safely. Superman never had this problem. 3 running steps, and the man of steel was up in the air, holding one arm stretched out in front of for stability as he flew. Neither of these things had worked for James, and they never did explain how Superman was able to make a perfect landing every time. James guessed that comic books weren't exactly the same as real life. Just as James was coming down the stairs, toweling his hair dry, he heard Darren entering the kitchen through the side door. A kitchen chair scraped, and Darren said, "Morning." "Morning, dear," James heard his mother mumble. James stopped in his tracks and peeked around the doorway. Mum doesn't normally call Darren dear. She was leaning against the kitchen bench, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and had some work documents in the other. Her long blonde hair was wound in a loose bun with a couple of pencils skewered through it, and her rectangular glasses were seated halfway down her nose. "You'll have to get your own breakfast this morning. I'm running rather late," she said, not bothering to look up. Okay," said Darren. James's mother took a sip of her coffee, flipped through a couple more papers, and then slipped them into her briefcase on the table. "I've got to work late tonight, but your father should be home around 7, she continued, tipping the rest of her coffee down the sink. "I'll tell him to pick up some takeaway, okay?" Okay," said Darren. "Be good, and don't play computer games all day." She kissed Darren on the top of the head and then whisked out the side door. Okay. Bye, Mrs. Locke," mumbled Darren, looking bewildered as the door slammed behind her. James walked into the kitchen, shaking his head in disbelief. When his mother had work on her mind, nothing else seemed to matter, especially him. Both his parents worked for an obscure little company called Aquatronics. James loved his parents, but hated Aquatronics. It took up all their time and kept them away from home far too often. He didn't even know what they did there. "Your mum's gone," said Darren, reaching for the cereal box on the table. "She won't be home till late." James nodded. "I heard." Darren poured milk over his cereal and then shoveled a huge spoonful into his mouth. "And Dad won't be home till 7, said James, grabbing some juice from the fridge and sitting down opposite Darren. Once Darren managed to swallow, he said, "Which means we've got nearly 12 hours to ourselves." He spooned the remains of his cereal into his mouth and pushed his chair back. "Come on, let's go." "What? I only just sat down. I haven't even eaten anything yet." "No time," said Darren, heading for the door. "You've got to practice your landings if you're going to use the VPR." "The VPR? What's that?" said James. "Hey, what's the VPR?" he called out after Darren. But Darren was already out the door. That brings us to the end of chapter 1 of Wraith by Shane and Alex Smithers. Please let me know if you would like to read the rest of this story. Remember, like I said, we have a copy that is dyslexic friendly, but anyone can read this book too. It's not just for people with dyslexia, it's just easier for them to read. Please let me know if you'd like a copy. I can organise to get it sent to your place, and I would love to chat to you about it. Thanks for listening. See you next time.